We are not immigrants, we are indigenous. We are indigenous, Native Americans to this land, First Nation, Aborigine people.
Basically, what is happening right now is the Mexicans are becoming a scapegoat for the issues that exist in America.
¿Cómo podemos ser inmigrantes en la tierra de nuestros antepasados? No podemos ser inmigrantes en esta tierra, nosotros ya estábamos aquí. ¿Sí? Pongan atención, no somos inmigrantes. We are not immigrants, we are indigenous. We are indigenous, Native Americans to this land, First Nation, Aborigine people, Mexicans, Guatemalans, Totonacos, Tzotzil, Tzeltal, Tocolobal, Yaqui, Chumash, Ojibwe. Hay muchos tarascos, purépechas. Sí, aquí estamos todos presentes. Nosotros no llegamos de Europa. Sí. Nosotros somos los primeros, los que estamos aquí, seguimos aquí y no nos vamos, gracias a Dios.
The Latin part is funny because it's, people always think it's because people speak Spanish and Spanish is a Latin language, and there's something to that. But it's also that Latin is a term that came from Europe. It was applied by the French, by Napoleon III and by the French, and their attempt to lay claim to Latin America, is that he wanted to expand his empire. It's sort of the same movement that sent the French troops into Mexico in the 1860s and 50s and 60s to conquer the country. And the French said, we have more claim to Latin America than, say, the English do, because we're, our language and our heritage is Latin, just like theirs is. When in fact, the Latin American heritage is founded and based on indigenous cultures. And after the First World War, there was this real wave of isolationism and anti-immigrant feeling in the United States, because we wanted to distance ourselves from Europe, which also meant distancing ourselves from the rest of the world, and including Mexico. But what we always forget, of course, is that we can't distance ourselves from Mexico because our histories are so closely involved. Another thing about this is that border is a border where native peoples have crossed without, there's no border there culturally. They've lived in both sides of the border, and now we have situations where we actually have groups, Indian tribes or groups of people, ethnic groups, who've been there for centuries and on both sides of the border.
And it doesn't matter if they've been Christianized or anything like that. We was at a powwow recently, and it occurred to me, these Aztec dancers came up and they had all the flowing feathers like this. And it made me feel good, that the Aztecs are finding their feathers again, because that's one of the symbols of our cultures and our pride that we have in ourselves. And then when people bring out their feathers in their native ways, that means they're adopting their own personal beliefs about themselves and who they are and taking pride of their history. And that's most important. These lessons that our family has been given throughout generations are the important lessons that teach us to live life, not the lessons that society gives us today, like the American dream. That's not anything that we believe in. We believe in caring for our future generations, 7 generations ahead. And so undocumented Mexicans coming up to live and try to make a life for their family, that's what we support. You know, because if they don't have a way of life down there to support their family, well, then let them come up here.
Well, it is a state of mind in which the dominant ideologies that are stratified get kind of accepted by the person in their heart, in the sense of what's really valuable. And so they find themselves in this terrible situation of feeling like the people that they themselves identify with are low class, and they are in this kind of double bind of feeling that they themselves, in their very essence, are part of the stigmatized group that are the other in the society that they live in. And so it's really hard. I mean, people kind of have to go oftentimes one way or another in that situation. Either they become totally resistant to that classification, and then they become, you know, using the word, kind of like, almost like revolutionaries, where they're actually paving a way to a different kind of identity. So an identification is the categories in a system that the powers that be use to classify people and then to make policy around. And for example, you see them in census categories, for example, where you have race categories and you also have ethnicity categories that are used as a way to structure. People get put into those boxes. You see it on application forms where you have to create yourself in these categories that have reality for people in that society. Identity, though, is something that comes from the inner heart of the person. And of course, it's always created within the categories that exist to some extent, although those categories can be challenged by people. And, you know, there can be discord about what the proper identities are for a particular person.
Yeah, obviously the political boundary was set, you know, where it is today, along that border where we now want to put up a huge wall like the Berlin Wall, you know, but it's a whole other. So, but the cultural heritage goes way back historically. Obviously, Latin America, you know, what the term that we want to say, Mexico, for example, covered that whole southwestern corner of the United States, including California and Arizona, New Mexico, and those parts of Colorado and Nevada. So historically, that was all part of Latin America, you know, until the 1840s, 50s. And we didn't really have a border. We didn't really have a border patrol and a closed border really until the around 1920s, the late teens or early 1920s. Partly as a result of the Mexican, after the Mexican Revolution. We had 1 million people from Mexico coming to live in the United States.
I'd like to ask now, because I hear that last year, after this gathering here, the crowd was swept through by the feds and the ICE and took a lot of people down to Mexico. And I'd like to remember them right now with a moment of silence. So if we could have a moment of silence here, and we'll remember those people who were deported. My elders have always told me, remember where you come from.